The year is 1943, and somewhere in the Italian mountains, a German Wehrmacht officer is writing in his diary by candlelight, and his hands are shaking not from the cold, but from fear. And he writes these words in German, which would later be translated by Allied intelligence officers. We have lost now today mercy goes to Triper, and then refused to patch murdering daylight, and they say it is a boy, a Canadian farm boy, who kills from impossible distances, and I do not believe in ghosts, but I won't believe in like this, no beginning to believe in this demon. Like, one can just not like say, wake, smoking, repair, this is doing right to the terrified emeralds, colats, and not the men are terrified nor quats, and more current. And that's how we will lose this again. Teenagers and we will with the question everything is like chemistry and or blood. How did a 17-year-old farm boy become such an effective killer? What made him different from other snipers? Why did German soldiers fear him more than experienced commandos? And what happened to him after the war, when the shooting stopped, but the memories never faded? Who became Germany's most hated sniper, and against Niles been on a battle. He put on a modest family farm in Saskatchewan, Canada, in the late 1920s, where a boy was born into a life of hard work and pleasures, and no indication whatsoever that he would one day become an English military legend, and his family were Hova settlers who had come to the military legend Prairie Sons land. Military Prairie seeking what land to become the Prairie Farm in the 1928. They're just a second saying all live. So put it right away. So yes, certainly quickly is actually strong color right. Yeah, with simple twin shorter. Farm family affairs are Canada. Hunting and shooting were not hobbies, or we'll say were not hobbies, but survival skills because store. Bought meat was expensive and ammunition was cheap, and if you could shoot a rabbit or a grouse that was dinner gophers shut, then you could another drift that was dinner for the family, and if you could shoot the gophers destroying your wheat crop, that was the difference between having a harvest or not pay longer that winter. And so this is a boy learned this regarding whether and real consider small time Then in Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and Britain declared war in Canada as well as the British Commonwealth was automatically at war as well, and suddenly the radio and the farm is automatically at war as well. And since suddenly the radio in the farmhouse was broadcasting news about battles in Europe, about German blitzkrieg tactics, about the fall of France, that are for them and for most United farm families. It must seem like it's not happening all up in German, something distant and happening to do it. For the next evening, the same almost need to come up to do it because the family and for the wall like this wall is what and the news from Year of London being darker was touring, but you were in Bob, and the last country was circulated by rumored atrocities being committed. And the dude sung about atrocities because the circuit committed by atrocities as farm boy became more. Kennedy had something, and in the spring of 1942, just after his 17th birthday, he made it change his 15th year. I think it's changed his life forever. Morning before daughter would change his life forever. Morning and it's very much spirit. And recruiting his tall skin of farm boy to become a farm boy. Concludes like nothing to a fight on the fort last week. So yeah, I don't know. And sent to that 17-year-old decided farm boy became a soldier. He was sent to basic training where he learned how to march, how to salute, how to maintain equipment, how to follow orders, and how to kill human beings instead of animals. And the transition was not easy because farm life was hard but was simple and peaceful. And now he was being trained to subdue the grenades, to throw maize, the bayonets, to throw other human some recruit sex and realization from the president monetization. The very best right back shot water. Extremely rigorous because snipers were not just shooters, they were hunters because snipers were not just scouts and intelligence gatherers and psychological warfare specialists, and the training covered camouflage techniques, both this how to move silently, how to moving hides, how to observe enemy positions for hours without being calculate bullet drawn over long distances, for to account for temperature, humidity, and also to live when incredibly account for the mental structure have it in the top And then in 33 out of Europe as part of the Canadian Army's deployment to the Italian campaign, and he was still only 17 years old, and he had never been more than 50 miles from his family's farm. Now he was farmed. Before the Yasrao was from a crop ship in the Iran a crowded troop ship, and Atlantic Ocean on a crowded troop ship. He would hunt a war zone for the rest of his life, and when either of that war hit immediately, because this was a final boy of him one. In that time, fear war, my wire for war thing because while other soldiers were getting killed in frontal assaults and machine gun ambushes, Farm Boy was using his sniper training to kill Germans from distances they did not think were possible, and from distances they did not think were possible. And his first kill came as Thorolf on Iraqi out in combat, and he had positioned himself. The German officer afforded craft traveled motionless for 6 hours. He took him in the shower. The officer caught her under the cover, but they had no idea where they got coming. Over and over, because while the rest of his unit engaged in conventional combat assaults and firefights, he operated independently, moving Thlando like a ghost, positioning himself in hides that took hours to construct, waiting with infinite patience for targets, and then taking single devastating travesting shots that could German soldiers as often as then vanishing the chain from fire, to pinpoint when his locations and And then Sumpernampeth turned from an effective sniper into a legend because in October 1943 his unit was pinned down by a German machine gun nest that was positioned in a church bell tower 800 yards away, and the machine gun had a perfect field of fire covering the entire valley, and every time Canadian forces tried to advance they were cut down, and artillery had been unable to destroy the police. Severing had required able to destroy the visiting. The only way to destroy the very shot of Shepherd is that would automatic right shot because the only way to set to making another alter set down or the shredder is not work ladder with realize when fiber on the tile let's say. So I found a third line of sight, and he stepped rifle and he waited beside because he needed the wind to drop on. He needed the machine gunner to expose himself enough for a clean shot, and he lay there for 2 hours absolutely motionless, bullet for location techless, while bullets occasionally zipped over his head, while artillery occasionally raged around. Her antenna was completely focused on that rifle, and they were the one target, and finally the moment came where for just 3 seconds out came one of the machine gunners. The But remember not the time when a German officer had wits as the shot through binoculars, and he had seen the machine gunner drop, and he had timed to sound the shot in a drop, and he had timed the sound of the shot and calculated roughly where it must have come from, and he was absolutely sex-stunned, because this was not a lucky shot, this was precision marksmanship at a level out. It seemed from the report of the scene of print describing an opportunity, and how it happened, who was now becoming a legend, had no idea that they're talking about him, because he was just doing his job day after day, taking shots, eliminating targets, surviving, and his kill count continued to climb 50, 60, 70, and each kill was recorded in his unit's log ends with details about range condition and target. And his pairs wanted to promote an officer, medals to remove, medals to medal, and off to his wanted to make a lot of engineering. There's some kind of guy that way he hesitated, just keep my family, But even if he did not stow, every night when he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the men he held through his rifle scope, and he had killed so many now that they were starting to look together, but some stood out like the young German soldier, probably only 18 or 19, who he had shot while the boy ate for the German went for lunch, and who looked confused and surprised on them, while the man with the German Australia, who he had tilled the blood over all the machine gun and women, this has his before living that full shame, running away, when he was smile away. We're starting Federskin Khan to reached up in 20, and he had become one of the most decorated soldiers in his Dahlia's battalion, even though he kept refusing promotions, and he had also become a teaching example because his commanders would bring new snipers to shadow and to learn his techniques. And what they learned was that his success was just but about his sleep, more time, he's certain about dreaming of silly shipping. and the plan out to see her, then that little teens who shoot and all something, that point, and the parents just read and he said, and he saw my motive that he was already almost for the wartime, he said, the Germans, by now multiple Wehrmacht units, had replied bayonets had reported casualties, reported casualties from this ghost sniper, and the pattern was clear, and senior German commanders held meetings specifically to discuss how to counter this threat, and they assigned their own prisoners to hunt for him, count sniper operates to spot his flash of him, that marksman position flash, which remember from traveling the positions, who came and left the right position, there and turn, started to with McGaff, now we're the 6 as an express, maybe this front and then they came June 6, 1944, and half Waffen in France, the Italian and landings, or Italian campaign continued, and this farm boy was still in the mountains, still hunting, still killing, and by now he was 18 years old, and he'd been in combat for almost a year, and he had seen things that no teenager should ever see at high levels of. He had seen no T-con looks ever was very hard in the army forum, he could go to gunners of Canadian, almost a world in the area. In August, a third from Italy to France to participate in the liberation campaigns, and this was a different kind of warfare, because instead of mountains and defensive positions, they were now fighting through French villages and cities, and the combat was close quarters and chaotic, and there were civilians everywhere, which made the job more complicated, because it hasn't been totally complicated, because you had absolutely starting to reach initials not very long, and find well up. I look at that little clips factor, but one can look at the second, I look at the show, but in October, he ended his war because his unit was clearing a French town, and he was positioned on a rooftop providing cover, and a German soldier spotted his position and threw a grenade, and the explosion knocked him off the roof, and he fell 15 feet and hit the ground hard, and his rifle was destroyed, his left arm was broken, he had shrapnel wounds, his also comes to cover or not. The process side, and he could be hit with space at home, by the way. The medic just shook his head and sent home home into my hill. Wanted to warn the wife and warm to room from the enemy's war, and it was warm then. And true to his word, 6 weeks later, after Arm had healed, he returned to his unit, and his commander tried to reassign him to training duties, but he refused, and he requested a new rifle and permission to return to combat operations, and his commander looked at this now 18-year old kid who had been wounded and who had every reason to accept a safe assignment, and who instead wanted to go to the one less enemy, that his commander and handed him a new lil and field wife, and said, "Turn up to give you life to hand." Because really for war, same new war, sir, and was an assassin. And in the final months of 1944 and the early months of 1945, as the Allies pushed deeper into Germany, he continued his work, and his kill count to 180, then 190, then crossed 200 confirmed kills, and at this point he was a living legend within the Canadian Army, and his story was being told around campfires, while pointed him and Western news soldiers as the kid at 200 pound in bear kicks. It was like Peter and bread. Wires and ended on May 18th, door 5 them of the February 4-5, and when the news came that gendered, there were celebrations with the Allied forces, soldiers cheering, crying, hugging each other, getting the fact that they had survived, that the nightmare was farm boy fought over, but this finding none of them, because he had been so long that the killing on survival, I think, so long fallen that he did not know how to feel tear, didn't know how to process. He sent them to compare from Berlin, was a fight to work, and it's a fight more rumors on that. When he summer of 1945, he was no 10 years old, and he had 217 confirmed kills, making him one of the most lethal snipers in World War II history, and he had been awarded multiple medals, including the military medal for bravery. He was offered opportune instructor to Wehrmacht to become his family's farm, and to kind of experiment, he declined everything. He comes from a woman. The parents, very hardened men, and hardened boardroom, and to stand doing it. It was coming home, tried to celebrate the funeral, started trying to drown them, and then he's a South and Trapper and the Trump really with Coleman muscles on war. Referring to would not go away. But they did not understand what he had been through, because how could they possibly comprehend what it was like to kill over 200 human beings, to see their faces through a scope, to watch them fall, to carry that weight every single day, and there were no support support systems for soldiers with what we now call PTSD, because back then it was called shock and it was seeing weakness. We're expecting a jet and we're started from the war. And he returned in front of me before he was firing. It was called, they were going to go slow and bad. And we were seeing we shall down. If you face over, kind of up, throwing it sounding to self war, type of war. Warning, I mean, said, so he saw us. And asked if he would be willing to talk about his experiences for a book about Canadian snipers, and Canadian snipers in World War II. And at first he refused, but the historian was persistent, and eventually he agreed to one interview. And during that interview, he talked for 6 hours about his training, about Italy, about France. The specific shots and mission I'm had fighting men. He's in the awkward middle of it. So again, it has my technical that was necessary. That is something I want to He died at the age of 64, and his obituary in the local newspaper was brief and mentioned only that he had been a farmer and a World War II veteran, and there was no mention of his extraordinary service, no mention of the 217. In fact, that German battalions and was buried in a small Confederate cemetery. A few people attended the heaven and the lore, and many died during the war because he never sought glory or his mom and his first born. He should be known. The warning with his memory, farmer and he would pray far better. In the decades since, his death story has gradually come to light through military records, through German war diaries that mention the ghost sniper, through interviews with soldiers who served with him, and through the research of military historians who recognize that his achievements, who recognize that his story extraordinary, a case study in snake power training programs around the world. But warn the world. Hearing story war and wine or during your story was Today, when I get World War II, we focus on the big battles, the famous generals, the turning points like Day and Stalingrad and the atomic bombs, but we sometimes forget the individual soldiers who fought and bled and died and made extraordinary contributions that changed the course of battles, and Sniper is one of those forgotten heroes. This is not why he never wrote a memoir. He nesn't, Nark's been seen him, but tactical and survival isn't the capable of mission. Morality and what we ask Young Parai Pizung to do in the name of freedom and justice, because on one hand he was clearly a hero who used his skills to fight against Nazi Germany, which was genuinely evil and which needed to be stopped, and every German soldier saving lives and kind of contribute to action with justified burden, and from his actions were not just justified by him, but as human beings wishing that trend of state of the United States. Was There is also the question of how we remember soldiers like this, because our culture often glorifies warriors and treats killing in war as something heroic and admirable, and there are movies and video games and books that make sniping seem cool and exciting, and that portrays snipers as badass heroes. The reality that was very different. It's not cool or exciting about line but it's most mystery. It's rather than that man, although it's where it is there are others rolled of war and told me that where the war And yet, despite all the darkness, despite the trauma and the guilt and the pain, there is also something undeniably compelling about this story, because it is a story about a young person who faced an impossible situation and rose to him, who discovered that he had abilities he never knew, desperately needed people to assume maybe others evil and exterminate others evil. And there's something deeply known as lives online, and we are willing to sacrifice for something we believe. That choice, or what we the choice on the line. What was If we include the teen farm boy who became Germany's most hated sniper, we are left with many thoughts and emotions, because this is not a simple tale of good versus evil, or straightforward hero's journey. This is a complex, tragic, beautiful story of a young person who to pay an extraordinary price, and it was shaped by extraordinary things, but an extraordinary price, and his legacy lives are not monuments, historic to him in the German career was the most one most accurate who really can't person So should we take away from this examination of one storm wonders experiences in war? And I think the lessons are multiple, because first we learn that ordinary are people capable of extraordinary things when circumstances demand it, because this was not a natural-born warrior or a person who dreamed it. They told himself as a farm, get the military glory, the flooded farms from the war, and shit God afraid of having glory and strength for the violent. It's something on present second we learn on the risk keeping in the human get it to go dress human people currently the same with forgotten and I'm going to person standing the war, ruining the war for war. And finally, we learn that the human capacity for both violence and compassion, for both destruction and survival, for both trauma and resilience is far greater than we usually acknowledge, because this one person can contain all of those contradictions. He was a killer who saved lives. He was a traumatized victim who was also orchestrated hero as a farm boy. A ghost, he was a farm boy. And Higgs Sternman's that works that works. The more than what's the equals to full trust. And pull to these both more some person who pulled frame became Germany's most hated or fed up from the short prior historic pelving thoughts. Provoking and consider subscribing to this channel. Give me a son of this from until a story. I'm going to terrorists to be arcing until son of stories that deserve to be American history, stories that deserve to be remembered, and that offer insights into clarifies trauma and human shares chronological interesting process impression. The kingdom condition and extreme requirements the extreme between president because of extreme pressure because some historical. They found their journalists and impeachment wrath president the way and complained with the characters not his big car can open up became critical with more community and community with I'm going to take from looking at public and bloated at the wall to the same to remember that there is American princess